Hey, my name is Jasmine, and more than 2 decades ago, I was born into a very rich and powerful family in Syria. I was an only child, and my parents made sure I had everything I needed. They even got me a new baby tiger every few months, so I could ride on his back through our palace. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. I was only 10 when my dad ran into my room and said, "Jasmine, my love, you have to flee this palace immediately. There is a hidden tunnel that will bring you outside, and from there you have to go to Uncle Nabil's home. He will take care of you. Just trust me, and we will see each other again soon." I remember being petrified, but I followed my dad's order and went with one of the maids through the tunnel. It was connected to the sewage water system of our city, and we had to climb out of a manhole cover to get out again. When we arrived in front of my Uncle Nabil's home, we saw several policemen in front of it, and then they forcefully brought him outside and put him into their black van. My maid wasn't sure what to do, but she said we could go to her hometown and live with her family for some time. Of course, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to find my parents. So when my maid was distracted for a moment, I took my chance and ran away to find my parents. And because I had grown up in a palace, I was pretty naive and didn't know much about the life outside. Suddenly, I was all alone in a big city. I walked back to my parents' palace, but I could see from afar how it was burning. I felt so hopeless that I just broke down and cried. From one day to the other, I had lost everything. My parents, my home, and now also my maid. The first night sleeping on the streets was the most horrible experience of my life. It was that night when I learned that unless someone protects you, that other people will try to take advantage of you, even if you're only 10 years old. Tired and scared, I went to the shop of an old woman who was selling bread. I asked if I could work for her in exchange for shelter, and luckily, she agreed. She made me work very hard, but at least it made me forget about my problems. But one night, the old woman asked me about my parents, and I told her my family name. At first she didn't believe that I was the child of one of the richest and most powerful families in our country. But when she realized I was telling the truth, she got angry and said my family had stolen her uncle's land, which led to him becoming poor and homeless. Of course, I was just a little girl and had no idea what she was talking about. But she must have hated my family a lot, because next, she kicked me out of her shop and onto the streets again. Trust me, you don't want to be alone on the streets at night as a 10-year-old girl. I'll spare you the details, but that was the beginning of the worst period in my life. For weeks, I was begging on the streets for food until one day a man approached me and asked for my name. I wasn't sure if I should trust him, but I was so weak and hungry that I just didn't care anymore. So I told him my family name and who I was. I was lucky. He turned out to be an old friend of my dad, who had been searching for me since I disappeared. Later that day, he explained to me what was going on. He said my dad had refused to give half of his money to the new ruler of Syria, and therefore was thrown into prison. He also told me that my parents probably weren't alive anymore. But I was too young to understand what that meant. I still thought my parents were simply playing a game, and soon we would be reunited. But the next week, my dad's friend gave me a fake passport and sent me to the United States of America to start a new life. I was picked up by someone who turned out to be a distant relative of mine, and even though he had never met my dad or mom, he was generous enough to raise me. It was a strange relationship, though. He didn't treat me like a daughter, but rather as a maid who had to clean his apartment and cook for his family in exchange for being allowed to live with him. His daughter was the same age as me, and never liked me. For her, I was some kind of parasite, and she always gave me orders telling me to clean up her room or go wash her dishes. But even though she never treated me with respect, I still couldn't hate her. She and her family were the reason I wasn't living on the streets of Syria anymore. And cleaning and cooking for a whole family from age 10 taught me a hard work ethic. So when I went to university, I studied harder than any of my classmates, and after 3 years, I graduated, summa cum laude, from Columbia University. Afterward, I started my own home cleaning company, which today has more than 90 employees. I just kept on working harder and harder, driven by my fear of ending up on the streets again. But even though I achieved a lot of success in my life, I still felt like something was missing. It all changed when I met Jordan at a business event. He was a famous NFL player and extremely confident. When he took me into his arms, I finally felt safe again, just like I did many years ago when I was living with my parents inside our beautiful palace back in our home country. Most of my memories have faded, but I can still remember my loving parents. I miss them a lot. My husband and I got married 2 months ago, and now I'm pregnant. I feel like my family gave me a purpose to my life, because it can't be all about achieving and making money. There must be something that makes the suffering of life worth it. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope that all of you will someday find the right person to share your life.
My life was bad enough growing up poor in Manaus, the biggest city in the Brazilian Amazonas. All we had was poverty, crime, and mosquitoes. To make things worse, I developed a rare water allergy due to a genetic defect. This means that whenever I come in contact with water, I have an allergic reaction to it, and hives form all over my skin. This was especially cruel, because here in the rainforest, it's really hot. I was constantly sweating, and due to my allergy, my own sweat felt like thousands of needles poking me non-stop. All I could do was lay on my bed, cry, and wish I would die. But even my tears caused my face to burn and swell up. It was a life of endless torture. My dad was very poor and couldn't afford air conditioning that could have stopped me from sweating. He felt so guilty about it that he spent all his free time wiping the moisture off my skin with towels, just to lessen my pain a bit. But after a few months of seeing me suffer, my dad couldn't take it anymore. He took all his savings and spent them to rent a boat. He told me to get in and put a blindfold on me. Then he drove us deep into the rainforest. It must have been more than 12 hours before he stopped and helped me off the boat. Then he walked me deep into the jungle so I wouldn't find the way back. When he finally took off the blindfold, I saw him crying. He said, "You know how much I love you. I'd do anything for you, but I can't see you suffer anymore." I understood that my dad had brought me here into the jungle to die. But I wasn't mad at my dad. I had prayed for months to be relieved from my suffering, and I knew he was doing it out of love. I gave him one last hug and told him that he was the best dad I could have asked for. Then he turned around and walked away, leaving me behind to die. And despite my pain, I felt at peace. I just lay down and marveled at the beauty around me until I fell asleep. The next morning, it started raining, though. So much that not even the trees could give me shelter. Floods covered my feet, and it hurt so badly that I changed all my plans in an instant. Maybe it was endorphins released in my body due to the pain. I'm not sure, but I knew I wanted to live. And so I just started running, into the direction my dad had taken off when he left me. I never found the river my dad and I had come from, but after several days of walking, I arrived at a highway, far away from my home. I walked right in the middle of it, made a car stop, and collapsed out of exhaustion. The woman brought me to a hospital where the doctors gave me an adrenaline injection right into my heart to wake me up. They asked if I knew what had happened to me, and I told them about my allergy. It was a poor hospital, though, and the only air-conditioned room was the drug compartment room. So they brought me there. It was a small and dark room without a window. They gave me a pillow, and I quickly fell asleep. Over the following weeks, I slowly recovered, but I didn't consider going back to my family because A, they had no air conditioning, and B, I didn't want to be a burden to them again. I lived inside the drug compartment for over a month, until a female doctor of the hospital offered me to move into her apartment. At first, I thought she was kind because she gave me my own room with AC, bed, and a mobile phone. But when I asked her if I could buy some books to study from home and educate myself, she told me no, and said the room I was living in wasn't free, and I had to pay for it by taking care of the household. But even after I'd finished all my daily chores, she still didn't allow me to read a book or study. I think she wanted to keep me as her servant for the rest of her life. Her plan was to keep me uneducated, so I couldn't find a better job anywhere else. Meanwhile, I spent most of my time caring for her daughter, who was a narcissist just like her mother. She treated me without any respect and ordered me around to cook her food or clean her room. One time, she even made me go on my knees and act like a horse. Then she put a blindfold over my eyes and told me which direction to go. I ended up hitting a table with a vase on it, and it smashed on the floor. Of course, she told her mom that it had all been my fault. And when I tried to defend myself, her mom cut me off and punished me by forbidding me to eat any food for 2 days. Her daughter was grinning all over her face when she heard my punishment. But I knew I would have the last laugh, because she was nothing but a spoiled brat. She couldn't even put on her own shoes without my help. There was no way she'd ever turn into a functioning and independent adult. That was my life for 2 years, until the mom's niece came by for a family visit. I noticed that she couldn't take her eyes off me while I served coffee, and later on we talked to each other for hours. I knew she liked me. A lot. I mean, I'm not really into girls, and she wasn't pretty either, but we ended up exchanging numbers. I'm not sure if I'm a bad person for what I did next, but I made her believe that I was in love with her. And because I was completely out of her league, she thought she'd hit the jackpot. I moved in with her the same month, and she really liked kissing me. I didn't enjoy it a lot because she was overweight and had bad breath. But so what? I'd been through worse. And whenever I couldn't take it anymore, I just told her that her saliva was making my lips sore because of my water allergy. Which was sometimes true, but most times just an excuse to get away from her. My main problem was still that I was living in Brazil. It's so hot there that I couldn't leave my air-conditioned apartment without profusely sweating and being in pain. Meanwhile, my girlfriend loved that I couldn't go outside. She was super possessive and scared of losing me to another girl. But I already had an escape plan. I told her I wanted to become fluent in English so I could teach kids online from my laptop. But my real plan was to become an English escape plan. I told her I wanted to become fluent in English so I could teach kids online from my laptop. But my real plan was to become an English teacher so I could move to North Europe, where it's always cold, and I don't have to fear sweating when I go outside. She believed me until she went through my browser history and found I'd also been studying Norwegian. I told her I was just so fascinated with the language, but she didn't believe me. Are you planning on moving away from me? No, I don't. I swear by God. Good. Then you won't mind stopping all your language studies. But then how am I supposed to find a job? I don't care. If I see you studying again, I'll throw you out on the streets. After our argument, she took away my phone and computer, so I couldn't access the internet anymore to study. But guess what? While she went to her work, I taped ice bags all over my body and went to a nearby bookstore to buy an English and Norwegian language book. Because of the ice bags, I didn't sweat and develop hives. That's why my girlfriend never found out I'd left the apartment. She was so insecure that she only allowed me to go outside when I was with her. And if she caught me looking at another guy or girl that was prettier than her, she'd always threaten to kick me out of her apartment. One time, a guy smiled at me, and it made her so angry, she said, I should lock you out on our balcony for a week. Maybe the sweat would remind you what I've done for you. But it's not my fault the guy smiled at me. I saw you looking back at him. That's bad enough. I was hell-bent on getting away from my girlfriend, and that was a great motivation to study hard and quickly become fluent in English and Norwegian. In fact, it took me less than 2 years to do so. Meanwhile, at night, while my overweight girlfriend was asleep and snoring, I used her phone to send job applications to all kinds of primary schools in Norway. Due to the time differences between Brazil and Norway, I could even do interviews at night while my girlfriend was still hibernating like a bear. Nothing could wake her up. I ended up getting a job and booked a flight to Norway on her credit card. But before I left, I played one last trick. I hid her car keys. The next morning, she searched for them for 20 minutes before she finally gave up and used the bus to get to work. Then I took her car and drove it to a car dealer. I'd never driven a car before, and neither did I have a driver's license, but I managed to get it there without crashing. Then I sold it for $5,000, which was just enough to start a new life in Norway. I won't lie, I'm a genius. I'm in Norway now, and I love it. Super nice people, a good salary, and cold weather. Also, my people totally respect me because I only ever wear light sweaters, even if it's negative 20 degrees outside. They call me the Brazilian Viking, even though the real reason I do it is because thick jackets make me sweat, which is even worse than being exposed to the freezing cold over here. Oh, and did I mention that the guys here are really tall and handsome? Life can really change around you if you put in the work.
He is a monster, and we can't leave him alone with his siblings because he's super violent and enjoys hurting them. I know this is scary, but he shows a lot of behavior that is present in psychopaths. You might think I'm evil for saying this, but sometimes I wish that he would just disappear. He only cares about himself, and he is ruining all of our lives. But at least my other kids are great. They are cute and love to play with each other. Right now I am raising my kids with my mom and dad, while my boyfriend focuses on school, so he can someday make enough money to support a large family like ours. We also decided to not have any more kids for the next few years, because it would just get too expensive. Some of my kids even call their grandma Mom, but I don't mind. Actually, something crazy happened 1 month ago. 2 men broke into our house. It happened at night while I was asleep, but my 3-year-old boy, Chris, noticed them and ran to my bed saying, "There's someone downstairs." I thought he had been dreaming, but then I heard some noises and I knew he was telling the truth. Luckily, my boyfriend was staying over that night, so I woke him up and we decided to call the police instead of confronting the thieves. We didn't want to risk it, in case they hurt us or our kids.